morning, and thanks for having me. I want to give a special thanks to the council for the award that you gave me last year. It was, I didn't know it was coming, and it was such a surprise, and it's an honor to have received that. So thank you so much. The story I'm going to share some about me. It's going to weave in just my story. It's a story of public investment. It's a story of agricultural transition and diversification, and a story related to cleaning up brownfields. I'm a proud Kentuckian, born and raised in Richmond, Kentucky, in Madison County, and I came to Louisville in 1997 to attend the University of Louisville. And I've been here ever since then. When I graduated from U of L, I found a home with Community Farm Alliance, started my organizing career with CFA. And I hope that most people here know about Community Farm Alliance, but if you don't, CFA is a statewide grassroots organization. I think it's about 36 years old. I'm not sure. KFTC just turned 40, and CFA is not too far behind. Statewide grassroots organization, largely committed to local food system development and supporting small farmers. When I came on board, the organization was coming off a huge legislative win when we passed House Bill 611 here in Kentucky that allocated half of the state's master tobacco settlement funds. So the state's attorney general sued the tobacco companies, and states got their award money largely because of the Medicaid payments that states were having to pay for people being sick from cigarettes. So in Kentucky, we made sure this early 2000s, we made sure that half of Kentucky's $3-point-something billion over 20 years, half of it was going into agriculture. We had these 85,000 farms. How can we continue to keep these as an asset and give back to our state? And so CFA members put forth a vision that Kentucky farmers would feed people again, and we would, use our farms to create food. So I came to the organization with that vision. I started organizing farmers markets in West Louisville, one in the Portland neighborhood, and one later the next season in the Smoketown neighborhood. If you're not familiar with Louisville, Louisville's geography, West Louisville is the community that houses probably 80% of Black residents in the city. It's home to about 60,000 residents, so probably two counties, the same size of two Kentucky counties, essentially. The population has dwindled over time for a number of reasons. Disinvestment, the air is really bad. There's a concentration of chemical companies, distilleries that really concentrate activity along the river in West Louisville, and also in the middle of the neighborhood. So community has always lived in close proximity with heavy industry. And community has always been in a position to figure out how community and industry live together in these communities, and that work has been ongoing. And so we organized these farmers markets for a couple of years, and it was really a good opportunity for folks in the city. The residents saw the farmers markets as a way to really reintegrate retail in their communities. These are communities who had at some time had thriving commercial corridors. Just think about small towns across Kentucky and think about main streets. So that was how some main streets have dwindled over time, and some have been reinvigorated. Same kind of situation in West Louisville and in communities across Louisville. Some commercial corridors are thriving, and some just don't even exist anymore. And so the residents saw these markets as a way to really redevelop their communities. If we could have a farmer's market, maybe we can have a pet store, and maybe we have a doctor's office, and maybe we have a florist, maybe we have a bakery. And folks started asking me a lot of questions about development, and I had no clue. And so I stumbled upon urban planning as a discipline and went away to grad school in Michigan to study planning, and specifically to think about planners thinking about supporting local food system development. This was 2005 or 07. And at the time, my urban planners, the discipline of planning, weren't really deep in food system development. We've been doing stuff around transportation and waterways, but not really deep into food system development. So it was pretty cool to go to Michigan to talk to my peers about how planners should really be working with local governments to support food system planning in and around, particularly in communities where there's communities who don't have access to food. And so I came back to the city, or came back from Michigan, and worked in city government for about 18 months, and really used that time to continue pushing our local government to really be thinking about how can we support this 12, 15 counties around Louisville to make sure that there are markets created for or developed for the products, these new products that farmers were growing post tobacco, and that folks had access to a way to get that into the city. So when we organize those farmers markets, you know, part of organizing is bringing people together and sharing stories like we're doing today. And we did that. And when we brought people together, both farmers and residents, they had a larger vision for what they wanted to see in terms of developing a food system in Louisville and in our region. And a couple of ideas that sprung up were that Louisville, even though we're in the city, we still participated in the tobacco industry. We had tobacco companies that were processing the tobacco in our community, in the city, in the middle of the city, and selling, processing, and packaging that. Those companies no longer existed, but the remnants of them did. So you had a couple of different large pieces of property in West Louisville that were brownfields that were, you know, had not been cleaned up post the tobacco activity. And the community saw those as assets, right? Like there weren't a lot of, when you think about dense communities, you don't find 20 or 30 acres of land ready to be built upon. But in West Louisville, you had a couple of those because they had been vacated from tobacco companies and nobody had done anything about it. One of them was a property that the Philip Morris company left at 18th and Broadway in the middle of West Louisville. That property is finally starting to turn around. There's a YMCA next to it, and the passport company, the MCO passport company, bought the large piece of property. It's also adjacent to Brown-Forman's headquarters, if you're familiar with this area of town. And it's still vacant, unfortunately. And I can tell you more about that if we have time for questions. But the community saw that property, that vacant property, before there was a Y, before Passport started to build on it, as an asset. How could we've done these little markets for a couple of years. We'd like to see more things. We want to see a grocery store. We want a place where we can grow food in the city. We want a place where we can process that food in the city and get it out to our community. So folks kind of had this idea of this one location where you had all this activity around food so that people could get access to food, but not only that, so that people could create new jobs and new industries and be innovative about how we, you know, get food from the seed to the table. There's another property in West Louisville that had a similar story. There was, I can't remember the name of the company that vacated that property. It's a 30-acre property at 30th and Muhammad Ali, 30th, bound by 30th and Market, or 30th, 30th Street, and then Muhammad Ali and Market, and then there's a rail line that backs up at that property. So that property had been vacated as well from a tobacco company. The state purchased the property when the Ohio Rivers Bridges project happened. So those two new bridges that happened in Louisville, The state purchased this property really for storage, and didn't necessarily need it as the bridge project ended. This property was still in the middle of the city. So I'm going to step back a little bit and tell you just a little bit more about what was going on in Louisville politics wise. So we merged. We had the city and county merger in 03, I think. I'm bad with dates. Sorry, don't quote me on that. But early 2000s, the city and county governments merged in Louisville. And the city elected Jerry Abramson as the first merger mayor. He had been mayor for a lot of years prior to that. But our first new mayor after Abramson was Greg Fisher. And Mayor Fisher really stood out in the primary early on, as there were a lot of folks in the primary at first, and they all kind of looked the same. And I continue to say that he won that primary because he really championed local food. He brought together local food champions across our community who had been working on issues, farmers in our communities, folks who owned, high-end restaurants who had been buying local food for a very long time to support their businesses. He brought those folks together, and I think that was what made him different from the other candidates. So he won, and he continued to advocate for local food system development and champion local food. And what that has looked like more high-end restaurants. It has looked like distilleries and breweries, and it's looked like a ton of grocery stores closing in our communities. And so despite a lot of money being invested from philanthropy, money that the local city government has been able to help leverage, our communities still need places to buy food. And so one of Fisher's supporters and friends, pretty wealthy guy in the community, decided that he liked the vision that residents and farmers had put forth some time ago around having this one place where food could be grown and packaged and create jobs in the community and have food for people. And so the 30-acre property that I talked about, we're going to call it the food port site, was birthed. Stephen Riley put forth a vision for this food port activity there at 30th and Muhammad Ali. And he hired somebody from across the world to create that vision. And they pulled together a community advisory committee once people had a better understanding of what the business plan was for that property. So they said that they wanted to have jobs. They wanted to make sure that people had food, but the Seed Capital Kentucky was the developer. That's Stephen Riley's, the entity that was created to do this food port. So Seed Capital essentially just wanted to be a landlord, and they wanted to see these activities happen. And so in the business planning around the food port, there were two big activities that were really going to fund the rest of it. One was an indoor growing facility out of Chicago. They were going to grow greens inside a building. And then the other was a biodigester. This was going to be an entity that would take food scraps from local businesses, would take scraps from local farmers, and a lot of scraps from the distilleries, and turn that into methane gas. And when the community heard about that, the community totally rejected it. Why? Because the air is already dirty. And folks heard methane gas, and that's all that they heard. They also had been excited about the prosperity of jobs and good food, but the methane was a non-starter for folks, and the community started organizing. So in a matter of about 18 months, the food port, I'm looking at notes here, the food port was announced. No, it wasn't 18 months, it was about a year, less than a year. The food port was announced with this idea, with these business ideas as a part of it. And within a year, the food port backed off from the biodigester because the community really organized, ran an awesome campaign. Nowhere, you couldn't go anywhere in West Louisville and not see signs that said no methane, we don't want it. And so that project was pulled off of the development. The guy who was going to grow greens indoors, he went belly up, he went bankrupt. And so eventually the food port died. The vision of the food port died, and they withdrew the opportunity to make that happen. And subsequently, during this time, there was a lot of development projects that were happening in the community, not just in West Louisville, but across the community, that the public local government just failed every time the local government was involved. The projects did not go well. And so when this food port project didn't happen, there was an opportunity for local government to really engage the community about what could be next. And that happened. People put forth projects and ideas. My team with the Louisville Association for Community Economics and the Louisville Community Grocery, we pitched to have the grocery store there. We weren't really in a position to make that happen at that time, but we did push, we were part of, I think there were 4 applicants that were able to put forth a project proposal for those 30 acres of land. And eventually I don't know the name, the Norton, what is it called? It's a track and field facility that the Louisville Urban League has now at that facility. I'm so sorry, I don't know the exact name. But Norton is the first name because they put they put some money into it. I'm happy to answer some questions. There's a lot of small stories that go into how this happened, a lot around how public money went into, or promises of public money went into to help support the food port, how community was really left out of the planning, even though there was a community advisory committee. It kind of happened after the fact, after the business plan was kind of created. And would love to talk more about where we are with the grocery store if we have time. So I will yield my time now.